Chapter 13. Roxy leaned against a pillar on the back porch and stared out at the back garden. It hadn't been a surprise to her when Savannah had come right out here when she came to decide on the location and said this was the spot. "We can do the main room inside if the weather turns out bad," she'd said, "but the forecast says 70." And the weather had held out, an added blessing on the day. The sun would soon set and a chill would chase the guests inside. Bellamy and Roxy had gathered up as many employees who'd already signed the non-disclosure contracts to help out, and when it came time, they'd pick up the party and arrange everything between the big dining and living area. It wasn't the way the ranch house usually did weddings, at least the handful they'd done since opening, but Savannah had insisted she liked the casual atmosphere better anyway. For now, Roxy pulled the long cardigan tighter around her and grinned at the twinkling lights, the planked dancing floor, and the scent of roses wafting around them. "Have I mentioned enough how grateful I am that we could get married here?" Savannah came up behind Roxy and put an arm around her shoulders. "Stop, Savannah. There was never any question that a great granddaughter of Ed Pender had the right." She reached around her cousin's waist to hug her back. "Thank you anyway. From the bottom of my heart, it's beautiful and perfect, and I feel very connected to the roots of this ranch." They leaned their heads together and stared out at the garden for a few moments of silence. "I heard you had someone stashed away up here, like a big deal celebrity," Savannah said, pulling away to eye Roxy expectantly. "Like maybe Tag Turner." She wiggled her eyebrows. The blood drained from Roxy's face. Nash wouldn't have said something, would he? But how else would anyone in town know? Tag had kept to himself when Savannah had come a few days earlier, and she hadn't seen hide nor hair of him since they'd started setting up. "You can't say a word, Savannah," she admonished. "We have a contract." Savannah held up a hand and pointed past her. "Then that boy isn't abiding by it himself." Roxy swiveled around to see Tag coming up the cobbled walkway toward them, dressed in a sharp gray suit and a dark blue tie. She pulled in a long breath, telling herself that the fact that her heart had sped up had to do with worrying about people finding out about him being at the ROC, not the way he stared at her as he strode toward her. "Congratulations, Savannah," he said when he met them. He put a hand on Savannah's back and leaned over to kiss her cheek. "Nice of you to drop by." She raised her eyebrows as he pulled away. "Why wouldn't I? I'm practically family." He put his hands in his pockets, rocking backward and placing himself right next to Roxy. She noted that he no longer wore that cheap cologne he'd always used in high school, but she liked the sharp scent of whatever he wore now. And the money he must have spent on the custom suit. "Boy." "You wish," Savannah said, laughing and shaking her head at Tag. And a good thing, because Roxy had been about to fall into a dangerous spell. Tag laughed with Savannah and glanced over at Roxy before turning back to Savannah. "Got any requests?" he asked. Savannah's mouth dropped open. "Tag Turner, are you serious?" she asked, bouncing on her toes with glee. "You're going to sing at my wedding?" "Might as well, since I'm here." Roxy caught herself leaning into him and straightened. The suit and the cologne were a 1-2 punch, but his grin as he watched Savannah's excitement threatened to KO Roxy. She barely heard the names of the songs her cousin rattled off and the multiple thank yous mixed in there. "And when I'm done," Tag said, bringing Roxy back to the present yet again, "can I have a dance with you?" "I can't," Roxy breathed, chewing on her lip when Tag's face fell. "Everyone will see." "You've always been embarrassed of me, but I'd hoped that my stardom had taken care of all that." "Stop it." She couldn't help laughing at him, and the disappointment flitted out of his expression. "Everyone here will take pictures and post them everywhere, and it's you, so it will all get blown out of proportion. And I just broke up with Nash, so that's the last thing he needs to see on everyone's feed." "You broke up with Nash?" Tag's eyebrows shot up, and if she hadn't been so irritated with herself that she'd admitted that particular bit, she might have laughed at the way that sympathy battled on his face with his excitement. "Yes, no, not really. It's more of a break, until you leave town." His eyebrows shot even higher, and Roxy scowled. "Not like that. You've purposely been making things complicated, Tag, and you know it." He scowled. "He broke up with you because of what I did at the concert and me being here?" The scowl deepened with protectiveness that made Roxy's mind spin. "The hike? Did he think the hike? Did he think something happened when we went on that hike?" Something had happened, but Roxy shook her head. "No, you muddy up things in me, and that wasn't fair to him." The excitement won out again as a smile threatened on Tag's lips, though guilt tugged at the edges, lips she lingered over looking at for longer than she should. "You broke up with him," he guessed. "We took a break," she corrected, but that felt like a lie. "Go sing for Savannah. Everyone's waiting." She pushed him away, and he obliged, but he cast more than one look back at her as he made his way to the stage. Winnie appeared from the crowd and handed him a guitar. People had been whispering and chattering his name since he'd shown up, but that all immediately died down when he stepped up to the microphone. It was a strange thing to see him behind that instrument in a suit, and not his usual jeans and flannel shirt or t-shirt. He didn't look like Tag or Dubois, even though the band started playing one of his songs. Tag Turner had come home this time. "I missed you all," he said, to laughter and applause, "so I figured I'd drop back into town and crash Savannah and Tanner's party. You all mind?" Everyone shouted, "No!" and cheered some more. Roxy dropped onto the porch step and leaned her elbows on her knees, resting her head in her hands as she watched him. As soon as he started the first song, one she'd never heard, that had quite a few mentions of trucks and one reference to a dog, his gaze found hers, like it always had before when he sang. Her heart clenched. Another reason she'd avoided his concerts. Listening to his smooth voice float through the air like it was only for her stirred in her the need for Tag that she'd struggled to tamp down after Laramie. The "what if he's serious" mixing with "maybe I've always loved him too." He finished that one, pulling his gaze away to make fun of Savannah's choice of a song for a wedding, and said he had one he thought might be better for the occasion. He started playing one that made Roxy's lips quirk into a smile. He was changing the lyrics of a song he'd written in high school, inserting Savannah and Tanner's names. They swayed slowly on the dance floor together as everyone else watched, but still Tag's eyes were for Roxy, even when everyone else watched the happy couple or Tag. So many people among the guests tonight had been there the first time Tag sang this song, listening to his honeyed voice and falling in love with him. Roxy remembered watching the way his girlfriend leaned in toward him, her eyes saying she believed this song was for her. But Tag had sung to Roxy, like always. So though they'd never officially dated, she could see why people in town would call her Tag's sweetheart, even considering the string of girlfriends he'd had. That girl didn't last long. Roxy had lectured Tag about that later that night, telling him he was breaking that girl's heart just because he insisted on singing to Roxy. "You're my reason, darlin'," he'd said in a fake country doll. But then more seriously, "That would be a lie, Rox. I don't lie with my music." 16-year-old Roxy hadn't understood the depth of that. She'd rolled her eyes and asked him to be serious just for once. He'd turned away and stared down at his guitar for a long time. 18-year-old Roxy hadn't understood either. 26-year-old Roxy was only just coming to. He played a few more songs before he left the stage to a standing ovation. Savannah and Tanner hurried up to him when he stepped down, both of them thanking him. She didn't know how he'd make people think he'd left the ranch house after tonight, but by the look of contentment on his face, it had been worth it for him. When he met her gaze amid the people who gathered around to talk to him, Roxy questioned if she'd ever be able to keep from believing it all could be some fairy tale come true, that Tag Turner really did love her, that he still loved her, that they could believe that magic forever. A few people from town made their way out to the ranch in the days after the wedding, but Tag would disappear and Bellamy would assure them that he'd left the morning after the wedding. Word must have started to get around town because he hadn't heard of any more curious onlookers in a couple of days, and the only mentions of the event on social media had talked about Tag stopping by his hometown for a friend's wedding, with, of course, some speculation about whether or not he'd made another play for his old sweetheart, Roxy Adams. Celebrity gossip sites had scrutinized the pictures taken at the wedding, pointing out Roxy's presence there. With the wedding over and any preparations that had to be made over at the ranch house finished, Roxy kept herself away. Listening to him play had made it difficult to stay off the road that would lead to a broken heart when Tag left again. She was starting to believe that he did love her, but they faced too many obstacles, like the fact that they lived two very different lives. But she struggled to distract herself. If any other guests were staying at the ranch house, she would have gone down and wallowed with Bellamy, discussing whether or not she'd made the right choice with Nash, and drowned her worries in something delicious that Bellamy had made. Since it was after dinner time, Bellamy was probably in her apartment at the ranch house. Another one of the renovations they'd made was cutting off the large master suite from the guest area and adding a small kitchenette, allowing the manager to live on site. Roxy could sneak over to the ranch house to hang out with Bellamy, and it would be far more distracting than the current Netflix binge she'd fallen into. She clicked the button on her phone to light it up and opened her message app to text Bellamy. A text from earlier that day with a link to something on Facebook popped up. "Have you seen this?" Bellamy had messaged. Roxy clicked it, then tensed when she saw it was a video from Tag, the YouTube video of Roxy's song. She almost clicked out when she noticed a comment thread underneath that she hadn't seen the first time she commented on the video. "This isn't the same song as before. They changed it," followed by some angry emojis. Other people replied to the thread along the same lines, making the claim that the lyrics of the first verse had changed. Intrigued, Roxy pressed play on the video, noting right away that Tag recorded from a home recording studio like before, but the room you could see behind him had changed. He'd recorded this version at the ranch house. She steeled herself against the way his smooth voice could hypnotize her and focus on the supposed new lyrics, her heart softening as she listened. The lines about a girl with honey-colored curls had disappeared. Instead, Tag sang about the mountains he missed, familiar roads with memories, and dusty boots by the door. She paused the video and sat back against her couch. In reality, the damage had already been done when he sang that song at the concert in front of pretty much everyone in Little River, not to mention the declaration and the ad-lib lyrics at the end. But this change still softened her heart. The first verse had been the reason most people loved the song. For locals, the connection they'd seen to his history in his hometown. For others, the romantic theme of the girl next door. If Tag recorded this version on his album, it would suffer, maybe not noticeably, considering his popularity, but it would still affect it. And to her surprise, she found herself missing the original lyrics, the ones that had reminded her so forcibly of the boy she lost that she had run away from those feelings catching up with her. She pocketed her phone, put on her jacket, and left her house, headed for the ranch house to discuss this with Bellamy. She heard the strains of a guitar as soon as she set foot outside and nearly turned back in, but his music pulled her and she didn't want to resist it. Fire flickered from the pit at the back of the ranch house, and as she approached, she made out the shapes of 5 people sitting around it on the benches. It had been another warm September day, but the night air chilled around them, propelling Roxy to the fire. At least she told herself that. Tag glanced her direction when she slipped into a seat next to Bellamy, smiling and holding her gaze, but never missing a beat in the song he played, an old one from before he stopped listening to his music. Don't you think people get sick of hearing him all the time? She joked in a quiet voice to Bellamy, hoping to distract herself from the way Tag kept staring at her. It had been one thing among the 50-plus guests at the wedding, another in this more intimate setting. Bellamy granted her a smile, but raised her eyebrows in a way that made Roxy aware that her friend saw right through her. Winnie was playing before. Bo and Quinn finally got Tag to play. This was Quinn's request. It's a good song, Roxy murmured, turning back to gaze at Tag again. The fire that threatened to overtake her at the top of the trailhead settled into a simmer in her chest, glowing warmer and warmer. As he played the last strains, Quinn begged for one of his new ones. Tag shook his head, instead starting another old one, but Quinn didn't give up, protesting over Tag's choice until he gave in. Bellamy squeezed Roxy's leg. This is it, Rox, she whispered, leaning in to listen just like all the girls who fell a little in love with Tag did. Roxy had always been able to see why. Now that she was really listening to him, it was difficult to understand why she hadn't seen more in his songs before now. Sure, he'd always said she was his muse, but that just meant inspiration, not literal descriptions of his feelings for her, right? At least that's what she'd been telling herself for a long time. The fire rose inside her, his words adding fuel to the flame, the way he held her gaze like pouring on gasoline. The words swirled inside her and created the picture he sang about a lifetime together. Thank heavens he hadn't sang this at the wedding. She definitely would have made a scene. She stopped her train of thought when that lifetime came to a vision of Tag, sprawled out across her couch and her curled up next to him. That wasn't real, no matter how much she wished it. He might be genuine, but he wasn't being practical. None of his dreams about their future would ever be real. Tag's life was too big for that. She blinked, looking around her in surprise to notice that only she and Tag sat outside next to the fire. Well, this is awkward, she said, staring at her hands. He chuckled, easy as ever. No, it's not, Rox. He kept on strumming, only humming now as he stood and made his way over to her. He sat in the spot Bellamy had vacated. When she glanced in the house, she caught sight of the others in the dining room, all gathered round the table in conversation, a window open to let in the music. You have to stop singing those songs, she said, pleading with him. Never. His answer held the fierceness that it always had when she'd questioned his musical declarations of love. Nothing's changed. We both want different things. Never mind the fire, never mind the ache. Giving in would mean falling into that pit of hurt he'd left behind before. I just want you. He sang those words and then nodded to himself, his smile growing wider. I just need you, Rox. Are you staying this time? She asked. He didn't answer, and for the first time that she'd noticed since she walked up to the fire pit, he dropped his gaze to his guitar. So they sat like that for several minutes, Tag playing with the occasional hum. Thank you, she said, when she broke the silence, for Roxy's song, for changing it. I never meant to hurt you. Still he stared down at his guitar. The irony was that it hurt her to recognize that insisting that he temper his feelings by changing those lyrics had hurt him. I know. That's why you should sing the original on the album. His gaze snapped up. Really? He wanted more from her in the moment than she could say. People really liked it. Even as she said the words, she wished she'd been silent. His gaze dropped back to the guitar. People like real. He quit playing and set his guitar aside. And every song about love I've ever sung, that was real. That was about you. You are the reason I'm famous. She looked at her hands in his and leaned over them, resting her cheeks against them. Please stay home, her heart begged. Now that she recognized what she'd given up before, it was all that stood between them, the life she needed. The life she couldn't ask Tag to give her, to give up his very soul, singing to her on a couch at night, and lullabies, oh, her heart gasped at that thought, would never be enough. She stood up, and he watched her, confusion in the way his eyebrows slanted, desperation in the way he gripped her hands. I really like that new song, she said. She pulled away from him and headed back down the road. That was the closest she would ever come to asking Tag to give it all up to love her.